You guys are all here to learn a little bit about motion graphics. For some of the people who were here last year, it's kind of a rehash of last year with maybe some new stuff on it. If not, give me some really great questions. Does anyone know who I am? Probably not. My name is Calvin Johannsen, and I run a video production company called Visual House out of Des Moines. Since I graduated college 4 years ago, that's what I've been doing full time. I didn't go work for anyone else. I hired myself, and I've just been cranking away ever since. So with that said, I'll show you my motion reel, I guess motion graphics. I'll show you what I have. My role, I'll be openly and honest, has slightly changed a little bit in the company. Now as we're growing, I'm more of like the shooter and project manager and like client relations. So a lot of stuff you see was probably like my first 3 years into the business. And since then I start to do other things, but I still have the chops to teach it and do it if need be. So why don't I, oh shit, I can't pull it up. I don't have the internet. Yeah, they gave me these credentials, but they didn't work. So, forget it. I'm going to give you...
I can log into the main computer there if you want.
Let's just do this. Instead of showing my stuff, I have another compilation. It's going to show motion graphics anyways. How about that? And then at the end, if you guys want to see some of my work, we can do that. But it's not necessary. So, this video I think is kind of long, but we'll just watch like a little bit. I think this is a whole bunch of sources I took, compilation. I just threw all this stuff together because it's a mix and match of what motion graphics is, like title design, animated logos, just all that kind of stuff, so you get an idea of what the power and simplicity of what these can be. So that's kind of the gist. Motion graphics are kind of used everywhere. And I want to talk about kind of how some of that stuff is done. We'll go through the basics, like the very, very basics of how you create those kind of things. And then we'll just kind of talk about concepts and those things. And I'll do a couple studies of pieces that I really enjoy. And then we'll just kind of open it up from there. Keyframes. So the very foundation of motion graphics are keyframes. How experienced are you guys? Is anyone here, are you like animators? Have you done some animation stuff? Okay, get like a bigger raise of hands. Okay, good. So like half you guys. So let me just go over real quick. And some of this probably works better if I was like doing it on a computer, but I just want to explain the concepts, how just breaking stuff down, super simple, and how that relates to motion graphics. So keyframes, really everything comes down to animating properties to create a sequence, to make some object do something. And literally it comes down from an A and B point, so trying to move an object from A to B. And then over time, keyframes, they will move. So you just set like a parameter here, as if I'm standing right here and say, hey, parameter B, second keyframe, I want you over there. So that way the object will move along the line. And once you understand those exact basics, then you can build on that. But you need to understand the principles of keyframing, which you can use in After Effects, you could use it in Flash, you can use it in Cinema 4D, Maya, you can use it in NLEs like Premiere, Final Cut, all those things to make an asset move. So all these concepts you'll learn here today are actually you could apply in multiple pieces of software and not lock yourself into a corner. So the core basics, if you learn these 6 things, literally, you could probably do everything at some point that I just showed you in those videos. They all revolve around these exact 6 core basics. Now we'll go through some video examples of what each one actually is, but it's pretty simple. Position, so something moving from A to B, or X, Y. So at one point in time, it needs to start here, it needs to move over there. The other one is scale, so like how big an object is. It could be start this small, or it could scale up and be really big. Rotation, simple, right? How something rotates. You have opacity. So opacity is basically fading on, fading off. So if something kind of fades up, it appears or disappears. Then you have an anchor point, which is a point at which any object, remember an object could be an icon, logo, it's your asset in your project. An anchor point is what all these positions relate to on an object. So for instance, the anchor point, if the lid, actually, no, I'll use my body as a better example. So you have an arm, if you're gonna animate an arm, like my shoulder is an anchor point. Like everything revolves around this exact spot. It doesn't happen in my bicep, but it happens here. So if I'm gonna rotate my arm, it rotates like this. And then masking. So masking is like a non-destructive way of editing to like show something or hide something. It's as simple as, I don't know, maybe I have 2 pieces of paper here and terrible at the same color. So why don't I grab this remote? Say you have this piece of paper and you wanted to hide like this section right here, or no, let's say this fast forward title, and this would be your mask, like you apply it there and that disappears, but you can animate this so that later on it'll show that or move. And I'll show a video example of that. So let's probably get into those real quick. Going back to that position property, things move X, Y. They just move at a point in time, they're relocating. It's as simple as that. So if you have a logo, say you want to move it from left to right across the screen, that would be position. This would be position with the Z space. So before it was 2D, it moved on X, Y. Now, like once you get into like motion graphics, you can get in a 3D space, which is actually called a Z axis. And so that's depth. So an object can move deep into space. So it can move up and down, it can move across the screen, and it can move backwards. If you're looking at a scene straight on, if you move an object in Z space, if you're doing some 3D work, it will give the illusion also of scaling. Because as an object, if you see someone across campus, say it's someone's walking at me, they'll look really small, but as they move closer, they get bigger because it's just a perspective kind of shift, but they're not physically growing in size. Scale, super simple. An object just scales on up. Let's take it up a notch and let's just spin that square. Okay, getting a little bit more excited. Imagine if you scaled it up and rotated at the same time and moved it across the screen. Opacity fades on. Anchor point. So This one gets a lot of people. It's the aha moment. So the anchor point, like the little dot is where the anchor point is, and that's where the source of animation is going to take place. So let me play that back one more time. So if you look on here, it's going to actually scale from the center. If I've set my anchor point to this corner, it's going to scale from there. So just like this, it's going to scale from the bottom. And I've actually set this off the object, the asset, like way off into space, and it's going to scale from that exact spot. Now it's really important because if you had like, say a 2D figure on there, had a character design, and you had like, say a drawn up arm real quick, you want to make sure you put that anchor point in the right spot so you get a realistic looking animation. All right. I like to think of this as understanding the alphabet, I guess. You got to know your ABCs before you can talk, right? Make words. Masking. So this one's, you can do incredibly powerful stuff with masks. And this is where we're going to have a square, and then I'm just going to animate a square mask over. So it's the same shape as a square, but it's just going to move across it, like revealing that square. Or scaling down, like that's just like a mask inside the object that moves around, because I'm telling, hey mask, hide this space from the object, don't show it. So that's me just animating mask points. Before this was just a square, but now it's starting to look a little bit more alive. Look at that one more time. So for instance, this could be an example of how to animate a square on a screen. Like before, you'd be like, oh, I'll scale it up. But now you can do all kinds of funky stuff by animating a mask and knowing you have these tools. After showing you guys those 6 properties, one fun thing I always like to think back when you're trying to animate the easiest object, and most likely it's a logo, your first animation you'll ever do, or bringing something onto a screen, right? And so I'm like, here's a perfect example to challenge yourself. You have a square, right? This is a rectangle, but same principle. You have this square, and it's like, how can you bring this on to screen? Anyone ideas? Yes, speak up. Okay. Okay, cool. So we have to give out concepts before we actually apply these and put them in the computer. So we can fade it up. How else can we animate this square?
Scale it from 0.
Cool. Like right in the center of the screen, right? Or you could scale it in from like the bottom of the screen, anywhere. Anyone else have an idea? Okay, cool. Square math. So I've probably cornered you all in a nice little corner because I've given you like the principles and showed you how I use them, but let's elaborate on that. So I did a real quick video of a square animation. And I think in here I literally took 5 minutes and made 5 or 12 square animations. I wasn't overthinking, I was just like quickly, how fast can I make something move? So you have it scale up, scale and spin, scale, fade. Now it's coming from a different part. Scales back. Overscales, shrinks back down. Wipe on. Okay, pretty straightforward. Wipe down, wipe up and down. Little mask, look at that. Now we're getting a little more creative, applying more and more masks, more spins on different sections of the square. It's literally all just one square, remember this. Did anyone imagine taking that one square and breaking it into 4 squares and animating those up to make one big square? Your mind shifting a little bit more of how you can apply these principles, right? As opposed to like, I have this one object, what can I do with it? I'm just gonna play it one more time. The first half of the straightforward version, like what everyone is probably thinking in here, we're like, oh, I can fade it up, I could scale it up. That's probably right where your mind went, but it's the other second half of, let's apply all these onto ones and go a little bit farther with these techniques. Because you need to understand these basics before we can even try to begin to get into that compilation video that I showed you guys in the beginning. So this should give you an idea if you guys ever have a class project where you have a logo that's designed in like a box or something, how to bring that up. And that's all of them at once. Like these start to get kind of creative, those are fun. Literally, just quick, like made those in 5 minutes, not overthinking it. So now that I gave you those incredibly super basics, this is what I like to say, you have to be able to crawl before you can walk, right? Like That stuff on the first one I showed you is literally like crawling when you first learn motion graphics animation. And I remember myself as a student when I first opened up After Effects or whatever, it's like, okay, overwhelming, what do I do? And I used to be like full of so much joy when I just made something like fly on the screen and scale up real quick. I was like, oh, that's really awesome. And now it's leaps and bounds because eventually, as you saw, like I started on those animations 1 through 4, like the simple ones, but then eventually you end up with those really complex ones because you start to think in different ways and you know how to apply all the concepts. And biggest part is you learn to experiment with those. So when I say you have to learn to walk or crawl before you can walk, you have to learn those exact basics before you can apply them and move upwards, right? This gentleman is an animator that I follow online quite often, incredibly talented. He works for a studio called Buck. I believe he made this video when he was 19 or 20. He graduated from Vancouver Film School. And it's going to be a title sequence I'm going to play. And literally, I chose it because it literally uses a square and a circle the whole time.
Oh, oh, oh.
The thing that I loved about that video and that example is inside a computer, sometimes a computer can make some stuff happen to you, right? But for the most part, you have to bring ideas into the computer and tell that computer, which is just a tool, a program, what to do. So it's not like he just had like a square and a circle and was like, run this program, make a whole bunch of awesome happen, right? And I say this because, and sometimes there's programming languages, expressions, like computer terminology that can, based off attributes you give, parameters you give it, it'll do certain things. But he literally, I know it's kind of hard to see up here, but he hand animated every single one of those little objects. He put up some screenshots, and it's literally like thousands of keyframes he had in there. And at first, when you looked at that project, maybe let's just try to grab up the video still. Now, at first glance, it looks like there's a lot of stuff going on, right? But if you simplify it and just look at one thing that he's animating, that's all you got to think about, just one thing first. So he had a concept of how he wanted these squares and circles to come in and how they're going to lay out and move on to the next interaction animation. So really, he just focused on first this one circle. He animated exactly how he wanted to the music, to the patterns, to the beats that he needed to do. And then he worried about bringing the next one onto screen. Or maybe he had an idea where he has two elements that are going to interact with each other. But he didn't say, oh no, I have 12 of these things, I need to make them fly all over. He actually had a set game plan, some sort of a storyboard, some reason of animation that he put in there that he's going to animate each and every one of those little properties on every little element. Building on all of that, like I said, I love that one because it's in its simplest form. It shows what you can do with just utilizing the very core basics of animation, animating those 6 properties with some elements. Moving on to this gentleman, Phil Borst. He created a video called Mork. And you can actually get this project file. If you were to Google his name and find him on Vimeo, you can download the project file and you can actually tear open the After Effects file and see how he did these things. The beautiful thing about this, do you guys have an idea maybe who he did this for? He didn't do it for anyone but himself. A straight personal project. Like no one's going to hire him at first maybe to do a piece of work like that. But now that he's done a piece of work like that, people will hire him to do pieces of work like that. And he now has a case study and a backstory of what something like that takes. But your job as a motion graphics artist, which comes back to your question, is you are telling a story in some frame or another. Just like editing a regular video or a news story, whatever. You want to convey some kind of message, feeling out of it. You have a job to do. And some of it just comes down to articulating that message and showing them the exact process of something like this takes. Because you have experimenting in there, you have all types of things, directions. And so it comes down to making them understand the exact whole process and then seeing, can we do it within your confined space of maybe it's a budget or what reasons or why do you need to do it? Come down to like, are you sure you need something like this? But a lot of times when I see beautiful art like this, just like J.R. Cadessa's first title sequence, that thing, which was a class project, but really they're doing it for themselves, for no one else. But I think a better answer, which I probably cannot give you, comes from those exact studios who do that kind of work all the time. Like J.R. Cadessa works for Buck Studios, and they work on really large campaigns and do huge title sequences and stuff, which I would love to get more into that world. I wish I understood more about it. Because you'll see stuff like that where they have huge teams like PSYOP, for instance, out of New York. Teams of 30 to 50 people working on pieces like this. And I couldn't even fathom how they pitch those kind of projects. A lot of it is you have to pitch an idea in the message and story. And it's like, okay, how do we create that story? So the thing that I love about this, let's just mute stuff. Let's just watch it one more time again. So we actually can just visually kind of see what's happening. He starts with a simple concept of like a circle and an eye and a square. Basically everything revolves around that, right? So if we deconstruct this just a little bit, let's come back. Look on this side over here. Just only look at these animations. See like these squares right here? So really that's just a nice little design asset. He animated it one time, but he multiplied it, moved it down, offset them, changed the colors, and now it's more of a design element than an animation, right? It was really just a diamond-shaped, actually a square-shaped diamond turned, made of 4 little boxes, which I kind of animated earlier. He did that one time, duplicated like 12 times, and now it looks really impressive because they're offset. Where else can we see? It's probably some of these like streaks that fall down. So all these things, it's layers building upon design elements. I mean, everything's there for a reason. You don't just like throw a bunch of stuff onto a table of ingredients. It's like cooking a meal, right? You don't just grab everything out of your cupboards and throw it into a bowl. Things are there specifically to give certain textures, certain taste, to hit those right senses. So if you just look all around, we'll just watch it back one time, but just kind of take in and see different like design elements that are just repeated over and over and over. And you start to see how something so complex is really, it's rather simple. It's just built on top of each other, so it seems complex. Like I love little boxes that showed up and then they disappear in the floor. Those are really nice. Those little spinning circles are kind of the same things. So this thing, he's trapped inside, it's trying to get out. Stretching the barriers. What I really love right here is that they do a nice little 3D piece. The whole piece was 2D until that one little thing. So a lot of this is just built on patterns. Like look at all those animated patterns. He just did them like 3 times in a row. So instead of thinking like, oh, I need to animate every single line individually, that's not necessarily the case. And then the patterns I talked about that showed inside the box, he ended that with a nice transition that came across the screen. So if you see a really complex scene like that and you really just step back and say, oh, it's beautifully well done, let me slowly deconstruct it. It's like any other project out there. If you're watching a film, at first you're going to watch all the different framings, right? How it's shot and then how it was edited. And you slowly deconstruct and see how they put together a story and see what the plan of attack is.
When you're making something, for lack of a better term, abstract, how do you know when you're done? Like, there's just so much going on there. How do you know when there's just awareness at the right amount and you shouldn't add more to it?
the song came to an end. No, but the great question is like art is never finished, right? Art is never finished. It's up to the artist to just finally ship it out the door. The whole like 80-20 rule, like eventually it gets good enough and you have to like let it go. Because if you perfect it, you'll never complete that piece of art. So you just got to get to the point where you're happy with it, you feel like it conveys your message, and you feel like it brought it to a close, and it's done. Which brings me to a really good point of when I first got started, I used to get stuck in the details all the time. You start making something like, say like this, or you have an idea, and say it's just a square or box on screen, and then you're like, well, I want to add a little drop shadow to it, and is the background color perfect, and maybe this and this, and then you get stuck in the details instead of the overall project conveying the message. So like my piece of advice is really just get it out there as fast as possible. It could be really sloppy, but it gets your ideas flowing, and then you come back and say, oh, I start to see it coming together. Let me finesse all of these details. Because is anyone in here familiar with the 80-20 rule? So the 80-20 rule, you can apply it like everywhere in your life, but how do you get 80% of the outcome by putting like the 20% of the income in, or vice versa? And so like these kind of pieces, 80% of your effort to do that last like 20%, 80 to 100, will retake the 80% of time just to get those final details. And it's like, do you really need to spend that time on it, or can you be happy with the way it is? So good piece of advice on that one, coming down to when do you know it's art done? Watch out for the details. Don't worry about the details in the beginning, but maybe at the end, spend a little bit of time on the details. And then once you feel it's ready for the world, share it. Does that answer your question, Ryan? Awesome. All right, so challenges. I'm a huge, huge advocate in my life of doing challenges, a lot of time daily challenges, or daily but monthly challenges, like 30 days. Like what can I do, a short challenge to get something done? In fact, I'll just go into a story that I did not plan for, but the whole idea of, what's the name of it? Let me think. 20-mile marches. Okay, anyone heard of the story of 20-mile marches? So way back in the 1920s, I believe, there are two explorers, one's from Scotland, one's from England. I'm going to forget their names at the moment. But they want to be, one was Edmondson, one was someone else. Anyway, it's not important. They're trying to get to be the first explorers ever to reach the South Pole. And so each camp has their own strategy. And Camp 1, their strategy is, on the days that it's nice weather, we're just going to go as far as we can go, whether it's marching 60 to 100 miles. And then you had Camp 2 that said, no matter what, rain or shine, we're going to march 20 miles, and that's it. So good days, we're going to march 20 miles, we're going to stop, set up camp, enjoy it, although we really feel like moving forward. And so what would happen is Camp 1, and they eventually they push as far as they can go all the time on good days. They start to get worn down, they get sick, they get tired. They get to the South Pole and they see Camp 2's flag already there. They beat them. On the way back, Camp 1's taking him. His whole team dies, but him and like one other man. And so it came down to this concept of 20-mile marches. Like, what is something you can do every day as a challenge that's just like a short block, no matter what you do? Maybe it's 20 minutes, half hour, 1 hour. You do it every single day. So you avoid fatigue and procrastination because they're equal enemies. You know, if you get fatigued, then you're just going to get burnt out and you can't do art. But if you procrastinate, same thing. But if every day you're slowly hacking away at trying to learn something new or create art, you can accomplish that. So when I say that, 20-mile marches, small bite-sized challenges, 30-day challenges, how can I put that into my life? And I've been doing a challenge for the whole year. I've been on a fitness challenge, so I was like, how can I do one that's really fun? And it was a push-up challenge, which is 100 push-ups every day for an entire year. 36,000 push-ups, 500. Seems very daunting at first. You're like, that's a lot of push-ups. And so is 100 push-ups in a day when I first started, right? It took me like all day to do 100 push-ups. But after like 2 months, now I can do 100 push-ups in like 5 minutes, right? But now it's every day I'm strict to myself, keeping that discipline on that 20-mile march, making sure you're doing it every day. So since it's not a fitness lecture and it's more of a motion graphics, how can we apply this into our work? Maybe it's doing a tutorial every day. Maybe it's experimenting every day. So I'm going to have this logo, and maybe it's the same logo for 30 days. How can I animate this? I'm going to spend half hour every day, or however long it takes, no matter what. I'm going to make this animation for 1 to 5 seconds, right? And that's all I'm going to do. Because otherwise, a lot of times, I would try this in college where I'm like, oh, I want to create a new piece of art for my reel or whatever. And I would have to think of some big idea, and whether it's 1 minute to 5 minutes, that task is way too big and daunting. Chances are it's not going to get done. Plus, why spend, when you're learning, all your time on one piece of material? Well, instead you can break it down into little milestones and learn a whole bunch more stuff in the process. So with that challenges, What is it? Maybe a month you can do a new animation, or maybe it's a week with a buddy. I had a friend, we started a blog called Think, Make, Ship. Doesn't exist anymore, but originally started out as a challenge for each other. Chris lives in Kansas City, I live in Des Moines, that once a week we'd do a new motion graphics piece because we just wanted to push ourselves and we just weren't doing it very often. So no matter what, something new had to be done. We would just pick a new theme, and all it had to be was 5 seconds long, I think, was all longer the animation is. Because you've seen right there, like that video was only 1 minute, but a lot of time went into it. So you can make something pretty high end that's only 5 seconds of time. So we gave ourselves that challenge, and it kind of like progressed, and we just pushed back and forth that said, no matter what, we're going to do this challenge once a week. And I found an incredible case study that I'm going to go into on this next gentleman. Stephen Nosgard, I would say is how you pronounce his name. And he wanted to do the same thing. He wanted to learn Cinema 4D. Back in college, I wanted to learn After Effects, so I did like a bunch of little mini challenges and tutorials to learn that. Well, he wanted to learn Cinema 4D. Cinema 4D is a 3D program, but it's used in motion graphics like all the time. If you want to be a motion graphics guru artist, highly recommend it. And so anyways, he was like, how can I learn this program? What's going to push me? And he gave himself a 30-day challenge that every single day he would only do 1 second of animation. Sounds pretty simple, right? You guys all seen that? We can just make something scale up in 1 second. But the plan was he would learn new techniques, stuff he'd never done before. Sometimes it would take him 1 hour, sometimes it would take him 4 hours. No matter what, every single day he had to do this. He had to post it to his blog. And then at the end of the month, he would have 30 seconds in 30 days, 30 experiments. Let's see what that turned out to be. That made me reflect back to your question earlier, how do you pitch something, right? Something like abstract like that. And a lot of that stuff is very abstract. And it was simply, he may have had one little concept that he wanted to go in there, but for the most part, it was all about him clicking around and experimenting within stuff in Cinema 4D. And once you've, like some of that stuff he couldn't visualize in his head, but once he started experimenting, he started to see more possibilities. And now that he's went through that, he's maybe developed some really unique, cool styles that since he figured that stuff out, he can pitch that in work later on that other people are not doing. And that's his forte now. Someone come to him and be like, look what I can do. No one else can do this. It's unique to me because I figured this out. And so something that is like every personal challenge, you're gaining something out of it for those sakes that, hey, what can you offer to someone later on that you're going to learn out of these? Was there anything that stuck out in there that you guys liked? I specifically liked the lines and like the little dots.
I noticed that he kept with a triangle motif going on.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting how he kept bringing it back and just kind of accenting it, not making it the entire overall thing.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing when you just stay around like one concept motif? Like I said, the triangle, you noticed it, but he executed it really well, right? He made you kind of rethink the triangle a little bit or what you can do with that design. Anything else? So anyone have, yes?
I like that it was really, like all the textures were really different, but the colors were similar, so it made it.
Yeah, that was one thing. He did stick to a color palette, so he's like, that way it's the details. He's like, every day I'm not gonna like mess around and see what colors I wanna make this. He figured out his color palette for the month, and he's like, I'm gonna stick with that. And he made that work, which is really nice. So discovery, like how did I get into this? It was kind of a rabbit hole. I remember being in college, and once again I took on some challenges myself to learn stuff, and because I wanted to learn more about video editing, all this stuff I had no idea how. And the more I kind of got into it and started like learning more, I'd be like, oh, this is really cool. Like, what's this? Oh, this is motion graphics, animation, something, or so how do you do that? And it'd be like Google search, tutorial search, and be like, oh, Photoshop. What's Photoshop? And then through this whole like discovery phase, you start to realize like you learn how to use Photoshop, you learn how to use After Effects, you learn how to just use all these programs, And that eventually you realize learn how to create art. So at first it's like everyone's like, what should I learn? Like, what do I need to learn? And I always say go to the discovery phase, like, just absorb everything. Be really, really curious. When you see stuff, be like, how is that done? How could that be done? Who do I need to talk to? What do I need to search to find myself like going down that rabbit hole to find these technologies or fundamentals or all those things? And so keep searching for those. The things I say do not do. Bettina and I don't know if anyone else is there, we had a good Skype session a week or two ago. And it was like, what industry trends should we learn? What pieces of software should we learn? It's one of those things like, do not learn trends or software necessarily. Like learn the things that are never going to change, the fundamentals. So like learn what you're actually doing. Like if you get caught up learning just After Effects and not really learning what you're doing in After Effects, like what the principles you're doing or what the thought process is behind it, what happens when After Effects goes away in like 2 years and some other new piece of software comes on the scene? It's like, oh, now I got to relearn this whole thing and figure those things out, right? Do not follow trends as far as like, it's cool to copy other people's work. Like you always see for a while, like texture stuff, like will be a design style or whatever it may be. Learn from those things, like learn how they do it, what they are, so you can change it up a little bit and do your own kind of piece of work. But don't just learn how to do that. Like don't go to a tutorial, do a tutorial, and just like keep replicating that tutorial. Like understand what they're telling you to do in that tutorial, not that like click buttons. Like don't learn to push buttons, right? If you watch a tutorial and it's like set this opacity to 57% and then change this hue to 278 degrees.
Don't you find yourself getting stuck in a style though? Like you get like hooked on something.
Yeah.
Then how do you unhook yourself?
Yeah.
I get stuck on fonts, and my students make fun of me for like, oh, yeah, we know what this font is. We know. So how do you? How do you get out of this?
Great. So especially fonts, like I'll stick to like 5 or 10 fonts as well, just so there's like thousands out there. And sometimes if I want to do something completely new, I might set up guidelines or rules. And I'm going to say, for this piece, Calvin, you cannot use Helvetica. You can't. It's not allowed. Century Gothic, you cannot use it this time. Like you have to put constraints on yourself. And that's what my buddy Chris and I would do in the Think, Make, Ship projects. We'd put constraints onto stuff we've never done. We'd come up like a theme and then put these constraints and make it really challenging. Otherwise, you'd always keep creating the new stuff. And that's what you have to do. Put those constraints on you. Back to like the tutorial thing, like don't just push buttons, right? Anybody can hire a monkey to push buttons. We need people who can like think and come up with great new concepts, who can implement, who can experiment, all those things. If you just follow a tutorial, which I see this work all the time, like you on a Video Copilot, and then all of a sudden your demo reel has nothing but Video Copilot tutorials in it. But then I'm like, oh, it looks kind of impressive. Let me hire you to do something. And you can't do anything original. All you can do is re-implement Andrew Kramer's work. Like learn what he's trying to teach you, not just the buttons, all right? Understand what he's actually doing. Once in, I stress the fundamentals, and I'm not saying just like position, scaling, yeah, learn that stuff, but learn the things that are never, ever going to change, like layout, typography, graphic design, learn color theory. Because inevitably, that's what all this stuff is. It's design. Motion graphics is design in motion. So like you freeze a frame, it should, for the most part, look appealing to the eye, right? Understand what negative space is. Once you understand all those, the fundamentals of design, your work will just get 10 times better and so forth. As opposed to sitting down and be like, I need to make something really cool looking, or understanding why something looks like a piece of shit, to be honest with you. Like, why does this look really shitty? It's not until you understand like those fundamentals, you'd be like, that's why it looks shitty, because I don't understand what negative space is and everything. Or I don't understand color theory, and like there's all this 12 different colors in this scene that don't go together, So just understand those things. What else can you do? Experiment all the time. I stress that, of course. Do experiment, keep making new stuff. Be curious, like I said. Reach out. If you see something really well done, email them. Most likely now stuff you can find websites of people's work. Go to those websites, find out who they are, follow them, get inspired by that kind of work, and then just reach out to them. Maybe you want to learn a certain technique. I remember there's a gentleman, I was curious how he was doing a certain kind of style. He was in the UK, and I just messaged him, and he followed back up with a kind of response. It was kind of vague, but it gave me direction. He didn't give me the exact answer, but it gave me a direction of where to go. And I got all that because I was really curious. I was like, how did he do this? I want to know how to do that. So do learn the stuff that is never, ever going to change. The software is always going to change. If you understand the mechanics of what you're doing, all those the principles of animation that have been around for 100 years, all that stuff's going to carry over to the new piece of software, and you'll be able to quickly pick it up and run with it because you'll be like, I need to know how to do this. Let me quick look up in the help or let me Google where these quick buttons are because you know what you're trying to do with the design element, right? Does that make sense? Perfect. Fundamentals, I just talked about all that stuff. Seek and experiment. Constantly, constantly, constantly be seeking inspiration. And which I say inspiration turns into perspiration, right? To create some kind of piece of work. And people be like, okay, where do you get ideas to make something move? Or where can I get an idea to do a 30-day challenge, whatever it is, right? And I'm like, okay, maybe I'll look at a friend's logo and say, how can I animate this? Or one piece of inspiration I always get is Computer Arts Magazine, which is based out of the UK. It's filled with the world's top designers. And a lot of stuff where I get inspiration, I just look at print magazines and see still graphic design layouts and say, okay, beautiful looking design, how could I make that move and what would it look like if I animated these elements into a scene? So that's an idea. If you can't come up with an original concept maybe, just go look at a magazine ad or go look at a billboard and be grab those elements, kind of replicate them and be okay, how can I make those all move into here and make it look really good? So constantly be seeking source of inspiration to turn that into perspiration. Eventually you'll learn how to do these kind of things so you can create your own art, and then soon people will be downloading your project files too. And I would say, yeah, go out there, follow. Bettina was saying, are there any blogs you follow? Andrew Kramer, I learned a lot of learning up from him. He's got some really great stuff out there, especially as the early days, maybe tutorials 1 through 100 are really good. Another gentleman by the name of Nick Campbell, Grayscale Gorilla, he started a lot of After Effects tutorials and now he does Cinema 4D, just amazing stuff. But he also just talks about the fundamentals in design, what's good, what's bad. And so that's really good. And he works with other artists, so he'll have people contribute to his site and say, here's how I did this scene, let me break it down. Seek out project files, the one Mork with the amazing piano one with all the colors and stuff all over. The project files out there, he gave it to the community. So you can go there, download that, and learn from it. Tear it apart, go layer by layer. There might be 1,000 layers in there. It could be overwhelming at first. But just pull it back and say, okay, where's the layer for those 4 little diamond boxes he was animating? I want to see how he does that. Because once I understand that, I can move on to the next thing. And next thing, I can apply those kind of concepts into my design. So, short and brief. So thank you. Question and answers, any stuff you guys have questions, I'd love to give it to you. More in depth on design, motion graphics. Yes. Yeah, it's nice that, especially if you're working with a project, and it's great to hone all those materials in at first, because changing the music at the end sucks. And I can speak from experience. We animated a motion piece to a music track, and we timed it out to certain beats and stuff, and it was well done. And then it gets all done, and a week back, the client comes and yeah, someone else wants to change the music to this bed, so will you just put it under there? And we're like, yeah, we can do that, but nothing's gonna be timed up, and it's gonna look kind of like crap, now. And that's what it was. So all of a sudden, you had this stuff that didn't time, it didn't naturally hit. There was some people made mention it looked like those elements were driving the music. So if you can get your music beforehand and storyboard out, here's something I didn't talk about is, you sit down in front of a computer, and a computer is a tool, software is just a tool. You need to have ideas to feed into that computer, because if you sit down and you're all right, I'm gonna make something really cool, 6 hours will go by and you haven't made anything, right? So just start concepting stuff out, storyboarding those things, really rough scratch, just get an idea of how you want, what message you're trying to convey, how you want an element to kind of move. And so that's where that process comes in, where you maybe create what we call an animatic. And you have, style boards or storyboards. And then you just put those down as still frames to the music, so you get an idea of the pacing of what a quick scene is going to be, how long this should be there, how long that should be there. And once you've got that kind of locked down, then you can go back and start actually animating or finessing to it. And that's going to make life a lot more easier, especially if you have that music track that you need to animate to. Sometimes that's not the case, where you can't get the music track up front, and the music track might not matter. But if it's definitely music correlated and driven, then you want to get that up front beforehand before you start any real kind of tedious work. And the process, like really get that stuff down there and like storyboard and put an animatic together so you can kind of see how it's going to flow. Animatic makes sense to people? So cool. Yes.
So when I start to do new things, new programs and stuff, I have a tendency to just take it way overboard. How do you keep it simple?
Yeah.
And tasteful?
I remember that. Like if I look back at probably my early stuff, I could dig it up. It looks terrible. Like you need to spend a lot of time in your basement making absolute garbage before you can come out to the world. But you need to do that. Like you need to learn how to make garbage before you can make beauty, right? So I would do that in the beginning. It would just be like, because you learn all the cool new tricks and buttons, and I'd try to imitate people's work and be like, oh, that's a really cool style. Let me just throw everything from my cupboard into this mixing bowl, and now it tastes like crap, you know? But I learned, and then you realize, why did it taste like crap? First off, you threw all this stuff in there. What doesn't belong? Let me start pulling it out and understanding that. So when you can understand why something doesn't look good or doesn't feel right, you can start to pull those elements out and get back to the simplicity. Like a lot of design stuff you watch, like the simplest things are like the most beauty. And trying to stay with that, trying not to overcomplicate it, is usually the best path to go with.
What was your major in college?
Electronic media. And so I did a lot of stuff that I learned some stuff in class, but for the most part, it was all outside of class, extra. Like I did some independent studies. I did hours and hours, like probably hundreds of hours of tutorials. I would go buy books. I would buy DVDs. I'd be the guy in the computer lab on the clock, like learning stuff constantly, just because I knew I was investing in myself and bettering myself, how to do this stuff, because I necessarily wasn't getting taught these things in class. And I realized that once I went down the rabbit hole a little bit, that, you know, teachers can kind of teach you the fundamentals a little bit. They can show you like the doorway, but it's like up to you to walk through and seek out more of that knowledge. And that's what I would do. So, but electronic media. But that didn't get me right here. Boom.
What made you decide you wanted to do what you do on your own?
I was failing some business classes. Funny story. I think this will get around to your story. Came to college because that was like the next step after high school. I was like, go to college. I was like, it'd be cool, like own my own business someday. I'll be a business major. And then had some econ classes, and I was like, this sucks and it's terrible and I don't like it. I don't know what to do in life. And I think it was my mother who was just like, hey, they have this program called electronic media, and you've always been like watching too much television growing up, and you've been like a musician. I like watched tons of music videos and stuff. And it never occurred to me that you can make a living by doing media production, especially even then. Now it's just blown wide open. But so I went to like an intro class, and then like everyone in the intro class knew what cameras and lights and stuff were. I had no idea because I didn't have that in high school. Like I was a complete newbie, right? But I just like looked at it as an opportunity, ran with it, absolutely absorbed like every piece of knowledge that I could find out. And then as I was going through college, I realized I'm not being taught certain things that I need to. So I would do an independent study, or I would do tutorials, or I would do my own self-initiated projects outside of class to eventually build up this like repertoire and refine my skills that allowed me to immediately upon graduating go out and find my own clients and start to do freelance and build up my own clientele, because I had honed all these skills that I can now sell to people. And now that's where for 4 years now I've been doing Visual House.
So what do like clients want? Like what they hire you to
They want magic. They say, come in here, sir, and give me magic. And I say, I'm not a magician, but I will try. It depends. Like, you know, if you're running like marketing campaigns and you're doing commercial spots, you might be doing something that's fancy, like, hey, we're running this promotion, here's this gift card. So you gotta do something high-end animator. Here's this brand new mobile app, right? Or sometimes I do documentary kind of videos where there's no motion graphics, and we just do, I'd probably say 70% of our work now actually is just straight up storytelling and video production, and we've gotten away from motion graphics, which I really enjoy. When I first started, I really got consumed motion graphics. Awesome career and those things, but I realized at the heart of it, I enjoy telling stories and interacting with people, and I couldn't get that through a computer. So I love going out and actually like framing shots and like being there to capture something. So that's what like 70% of our work is now. But every client's kind of different, you know? Someone comes to you and you have to understand their why. Like, why do they want to do this? What do they want to create? Okay, what's the right treatment, or what can we use to tell that story that you're trying to do? And maybe this time it's an animation piece, or maybe this time it's a video that we'll go shoot. So it just kind of depends every scenario. Answer your question? All right. Anyone else? I'm going to go here first.
When you were learning new softwares, how much time would you spend experimenting on techniques, trying to find your own style before you would just go like look up a tutorial?
Yeah, I don't have an exact like ratio necessarily. I'd probably look at a tutorial and I would see something and I would come back to like, okay, now that I've experimented with like these new effects or whatever it is he's having me do, I would say, okay, how can I take these concepts he gave me and try to create my own thing around those? And I'd experiment past them. So like every time maybe I did a tutorial, I would instantly say, what can I make that's gonna be my own? And for a moment here, there was I'm sure it's still here, the cable TV station, maybe. And I was the director of that, and I worked with the directors previous to me, and we always need to make like commercials or bumpers and stuff, so there's all this opportunity that stuff needed to be made, and it was up to us, like we gave ourselves permission to just make anything we wanted. And every time I'd always be like, oh, here's an opportunity for me to experiment and create something completely new. And if I've already done something like 3 or 5 times, that's no fun to me. Like I want to learn something new, right? So I had this concept, how do I execute it? And I would try to go do that and apply it. So through those kind of personal outlets, I was able to do that. But I would encourage, if you do a tutorial, maybe it's like if you're going to spend 1 hour learning the tutorial, spend like 1 or 2 hours experimenting after that to make your own kind of thing. And then sometimes, of course, you take like a few different tutorials and combine everything you learn in those and apply it to the next thing. Yeah. Like at first, there's always the saying like steal like an artist. Absolutely steal like an artist. Take other people's styles, understand what they're doing. Don't just take the style, but understand what they're doing, how they're able to do it, and then eventually you can craft and create your own and put it out there.
Okay.
Yes.
First off, Premiere, After Effects. I mean, are there other motion software programs that you use, or are there some that?
Cinema 4D is the only other one. We'll do some projects in Cinema 4D. So our workflow is like Premiere is our editor, After Effects, Photoshop, and Cinema 4D. And we only have to get in Cinema 4D if we're doing like 3D like phones and stuff flying all over.
And you say we, how many people are there?
2 of us. And I'll use other freelancers as well. Like I use a gentleman, Daniel Randolph, who graduated from Laura's College. Really awesome, worked for Screenscapes in Des Moines, and then he got an opportunity to go be the motion designer for Cincinnati Reds out in Cincinnati. So he gets to do like all their baseball stuff. And so we'll work together now and then. And then my friend Chris and I, depending on the project and workloads, I'll use some different people. But Chris Cook, who runs something called Brain Root Light and Sound, he's an alum of UNI. He's down in Kansas City. And like we've collaborated tons together and made some awesome stuff. And it's great working with other people. Like absolutely, if there's an experiment, like try to experiment with someone else and create a project together. Like get ideas out there, shoot ideas down, and like feed off each other. And most likely you're gonna make something 3 times as good as if you would have made it on your own. Yes?
Do you have a website so we can see some of your stuff?
I do. We didn't have the internet. So if you type in the, T-H-E, visual, V-I-S-U-A-L, house, House.com. So the Visual House. I meant to pull it up. Bettino put it there. But yeah, you can see a bunch of examples of our work. You can see our motion reel. And I'm getting kind of a feel for the style of work that we do. Yes? We do take internships, usually for like the spring or summer. You got to kind of apply. We'll look at like your portfolio and those kind of things. So we love working with awesome people. We like to work in an awesome environment. So anything else? Thank you guys for coming. I appreciate all the questions and I hope you learned something.